Israel will be saved, I thought, well, that must mean, in some sense, we're Israel.
Okay, since you brought that up. Okay, this is easy now that we've got all that. Okay, so you've got the root and you've got cut-off branches. Who are the cut-off branches? Historically, think Old Testament now, think what Paul, Israelite, writing. Who are the cut-off branches?
The 10 northern tribes.
The 10 northern tribes, of course. That's historically accurate. See, part of the reason that Paul doesn't take the time to explain his analogy in Romans 11 is that in his way of thinking, it's obvious. Otherwise, he would have explained it.
He's talking about the 10 tribes who were grafted on so that the Gentiles could be grafted.
Who were the first century Israelitish believers? Jews.
Right.
Those are the ones that are still connected.
Right.
But the ones that were cut off historically were the 10 northern tribes. But the 10 northern tribes are still scattered.
Right.
They're still lost. They haven't been grafted in yet. When will they be grafted in? According to Paul, after the fullness of the Gentiles are brought in,
right,
then all Israel will be saved. So when this guy got upset in the article and said, well, what about the fact that Jesus said to the Pharisees that they were children of the devil? Are they supposed to be saved just because they were... No, they don't have to be to fulfill all Israel. All Israel simply means all 12 tribes. And then you get to the book of Revelation, what do you find? 144,000, 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes. There's the beginning of the reestablishment of the all Israel, 12 tribes collectively. And that's the historic context. And it's the only context that makes any sense, because Paul ends up in Romans 11 then saying he concluded all in unbelief so that he could have grace on all. And then he goes into, how unsearchable are his ways. Past finding out. Who would have figured this one out? But he says, speaking of those cut off branches, he says, as touching the gospel, they are enemies for your sake. So they can't...
For election, they're beloved.
But because of the election of God...
The calling of God are irrevocable.
Irrevocable. And they are
amazing.
They are beloved for the Father's sakes, and for the promises God made as touching the election. They are beloved for the Father's sakes. The gifts and calling of God are without repentance. They're irrevocable. Therefore, all Israel must be saved. The historic context is exactly like everything we've read in the Old Testament. That yes, the northern tribes have been cut off and scattered, and they're going to be restored. Isaiah said so, Jeremiah says so, Hosea says so. They all say, yes, those tribes are going to be restored. Paul picks it up and says it in the New Testament after the cross in Romans 11, and everybody gets upset about it and says, no, we must read that some other way. What it really says is, not all Israel is Israel, and now the church is Israel, and now and they just make a hash of it. But it's very consistent with itself. So now, knowing that, can the root that they were cut off from be the church? No, it can't be then, can it? Because the church didn't exist when they were cut off during the Assyrian captivity. So then what were they cut off from?
The Abrahamic promise.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. That's exactly what they were cut off from. And what were we brought into? That very thing, the Abrahamic promise, absolutely. The promise that through the seed, Christ, all families of the earth will be blessed. And so we are, in keeping with that Abrahamic promise, grafted in so that we are saved by faith, just as Abraham had faith, and it was counted to him for righteousness. It fits perfectly. So then what are they going to be grafted back into? Promises that were theirs, that were naturally theirs, that God is able to graft them back into. And what are they going to do? Have faith, because he says he concluded all of them in unbelief so that he could have mercy on all. So Christ is right at the center of that. He's in the middle of all that. We're not saying that the Jews are going to have some separate from Christ future restoration. No, they're going to, by Christ, through Christ, get everything that was promised to them in the Old Testament. And that, again, is a little something I like to call the Bible. I mean, that's just so consistent with everything you read in the Old and New Testament. And there's no purpose or need then to reinterpret it, because it interprets itself. It's all consistent with itself.
Thank you for joining us for this week's study. We invite you back next week for another Salvation by Grace message.